Welcome to the Spectre Sisters, your portal into the unexplainable,
the unknown,
and the undeniably strange.
Each week, your hosts will guide you through chilling true accounts of possible paranormal encounters, bizarre events, and local legends that blur the line between fact and fiction. But we're not here just to spook. We shine a flashlight on the dark corners, question everything, and peel back the layers to find the truth. Or at least try.
Why, greetings, my dear traveler. I see my sweet pet Larry has guided you right to where you need to be. Oh, where are you, you ask? This is the morbid forest. Come, sit by the fire for a while and let Ranger Harper regale you with a tale to truly terrify. The Morbid Forest is a horror fiction anthology podcast. New episodes release every Tuesday on your favorite podcast streaming app. So, stay close to the Ranger, or you'll find yourself trapped within the Morbid Forest.
The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Of all the paranormal phenomena that scares me, ghosts and poltergeists are close to the top of the list. I can't really explain it, but maybe you know the feeling. Catching something out of the corner of your eye, hearing strange noises or footsteps, random knocks, scratches, scraping, or eerie disembodied voices. It's an assault on all our senses, and in some cases, our sanity. But here's the thing. Much of what I've just described has more to do with a haunted house or location, and that's scary enough. But there's something much scarier. A haunted person. I'm not talking about demonic oppression or possession, though some may say there isn't much of a difference. I'm talking about something that attaches itself to a specific person, not with the goal of taking them over, but of never giving them peace. In 1960, in the small town of Sauchie, Scotland, a young girl named Virginia Campbell experienced something horrifying, a poltergeist that appeared to be connected to her. The story is one of the strangest and scariest we've covered to this point. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the scary Sauchie poltergeist. What happened to Virginia Campbell in 1960? And was she truly afflicted by a poltergeist that had attached itself to her? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. The story begins in October 1960, when an 11-year-old girl, Virginia Campbell, moved from Ireland to Sauchie, Scotland with her family. Virginia was the youngest of her siblings and was essentially an only child, as the others had already moved out of the house and begun to raise their own families. Virginia's parents were already in their 60s, and it appeared as though Virginia had a lonely childhood. The move to Scotland itself was less than ideal, even though the family hoped it would be a fresh start. Initially, Virginia's father stayed in Ireland to sell the family farm, and upon arriving in Sauchie, Virginia was distressed to learn she and her mother would be living with her aunt and uncle in a small, cramped house. To make matters worse, Virginia was forced to share a bedroom and a bed with her younger cousin Margaret. As Virginia and her mother settled in, Mrs. Campbell took a job in a town that was not quite commuting distance from Sauchie, and she ultimately decided to live in the town where she worked, leaving Virginia behind in Sauchie with her relatives. A quick note: while researching, I found several articles with conflicting information. A handful stated Virginia and her mother went to live with her aunt and uncle, while a few others stated they went to live with one of Virginia's older brothers. For this episode, I'll refer to them as her aunt and uncle. Not only had Virginia left the family farm, her close friends, her beloved dog Toby, and a familiar school in Ireland, she was forced into a situation where she was essentially raising herself. These details are important because they set the stage for what comes next. On Tuesday, November 22nd, Virginia and Margaret completed their nightly routine and headed off to bed. A short time later, the girls called out, claiming they'd heard a strange noise in their room. Margaret's father tried to settle the girls down, telling them that it was nothing more than their imagination. And then all was quiet, at least for a few minutes, because soon enough, the girls rushed downstairs, claiming they'd heard another strange noise. This time, a thunking sound, quote, much like a bouncing rubber ball, end quote, which seemed to follow them down the stairs into another part of the house. Of course, there was no ball to be found. Virginia's uncle didn't hear the sound and became irate, thinking they were playing a trick on him, so the girls were sent back to bed with a stern warning. A few minutes later, Virginia's aunt and uncle looked in on the girls in their room, and they both immediately heard a knocking sound coming from behind the headboard. Now convinced the girls weren't making it up, they had them switch rooms in order to get a decent night's sleep. Except, within a few minutes of the switch, the knocking started again, and like before, it was coming from behind the headboard. Unsure of what to do next, the family did their best to ignore it, and after some time the knocking stopped, but only after Virginia fell asleep. The next night, shortly after Virginia and Margaret went to bed, the knocking resumed, and it continued even after Margaret ran from the room screaming. By now, Virginia's aunt and uncle were convinced Virginia was responsible for the knocking, and they believed she was making the strange noises in order to scare Margaret and have the bed all to herself. So they had Virginia leave the room, and the knocking stopped, seemingly proving their point. Except, within a few minutes, and with Virginia standing next to them, the knocking started again. At least one article I read mentioned several neighbors showing up to the house as the knocking grew louder, and once they arrived, the mysterious noises continued. Terrified and confused as to what to do now, Virginia's aunt and uncle contacted a local minister, Reverend Lund, who came to the home that same night. At first, the house was quiet, but soon enough, he heard the loud knocking sound and observed that it was coming from behind the headboard. And now, like the Campbells, he also believed Virginia might be responsible for the noises, and asked her to slide down the bed away from the headboard. But the knocking continued, and like the Campbells, Reverend Lund quickly became convinced that Virginia was not causing the sound, And there's something else. The knocking was not coming from the wall, because the headboard was not touching the wall in any way. The sound was coming from the headboard itself. They discovered this when Reverend Lund put one hand on the wall and one hand on the headboard. When he heard the knocking, only the headboard moved in tandem with the sound. And despite Reverend Lund's presence and attempts at prayer, the knocking continued. As Reverend Lund prayed, a large chest near the foot of the bed began rocking back and forth, slowly and almost unnoticeable at first. Then it shook harder, before rising slightly off the floor. Stunned, everyone watched in horror as it moved toward the bed, shaking as it did. In all, quote, it had moved about 18 inches. The chest stopped, then returned to its original position on the floor. End quote. Virginia was understandably hysterical. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. As the scary poltergeist activity increased, Reverend Lund tried calming Virginia down by joking that it was her boyfriend attempting to contact her, and he jokingly told her, quote, to knock back to him, end quote. Over the next hour or so, he helped settle the girls down and encouraged them to get back into bed and get some sleep. But as soon as they did, the knocking began, this time louder and more aggressive. And this was interpreted as Margaret not being wanted in the bed. The Campbells had her sleep in another room, and the knocking promptly stopped. All was quiet for the rest of the night. The next day, the knocking continued, this time from early morning. And other scary things started to happen as well. Quote, some china had moved by themselves. An apple had floated out of the fruit bowl. A sewing machine had started by itself when no one was near. End quote. These were horrifying enough, but as the week progressed, things took a turn for the worse. One article stated, quote, household items would disappear and then turn up again weeks later. A heavy linen basket lid opened of its own accord, and ornaments moved without being touched. Furniture also began to move when no humans were anywhere near it. Thomas and Isabella, Virginia's uncle and aunt, watched as their sideboard moved several inches away from the wall and was suddenly pushed back by an invisible force. End quote. The following night, the family called their doctor, hoping to find an explanation for the knocking sounds. As Virginia lay in bed, he and Reverend Lund noticed something horrifying. Virginia's pillow rotating, with her head resting on it. This was not the case of Virginia moving it intentionally or inadvertently, but one where the pillow moved underneath her head, despite the pressure being placed on it. Then the chest moved again, and the knocking sound intensified. And more than knocking, the doctor heard what sounded like a strange sawing. Another article described the sound as rasping or scratching. And then it appeared as if Virginia's pillow was being pulled upwards by some unseen hand. The doctor, who arrived at the house thinking he was going to observe a sick child, was stunned at what he saw. For 3 days, Virginia was held back from attending school. The family had avoided sending her amidst the strange occurrences. But on Friday, November 25th, she returned, hoping for things to get back to normal. Her teacher, Margaret Stewart, began instruction and the day seemed to get off to a good start. But then, Miss Stewart noticed the lid of Virginia's desk starting to rise. And just as strange, Virginia was struggling to push it down. Miss Stewart asked Virginia to raise her hands, but when she did, the lid flapped open. Virginia pushed it down again, only for it to lift once more. This happened several times in full view of the entire class. Virginia's classmates were rightfully freaked out. But then something else more terrifying happened. A desk behind Virginia began to move, then lift slowly off the ground. While researching, at least one article claimed it raised an inch off the ground, while another stated it lifted at least 3 inches off the ground. Then, as quickly as it raised, it lowered quietly back to the ground. Miss Stewart, confused by what was happening, inspected the desk and found there was no way for Virginia or anyone else to manipulate it into moving or levitating. A few days later, on November 28th, it was alleged, quote, "The chalkboard pointer vibrated, as did the teacher's table, which Miss Stewart felt as she sat at the desk. Virginia was close by, but not touching any of these items," end quote. Another article stated, quote, "As the pointer moved, the teacher felt the desk and found that it was vibrating as well. Then the desk began to move in a counterclockwise fashion, away from the teacher. She looked at Virginia, who was still standing a few feet away. At that point, Virginia started to cry," end quote. That night, the family doctor decided to stay at the home and observe the scary phenomenon for himself. He settled into Virginia's room and waited patiently for something to happen. It didn't take long. He watched as the chest moved approximately a foot in his direction. Then the lid opened by itself and closed abruptly. It did this a second time, after which the pillow on Virginia's bed rotated and the sheets moved as if someone were lying in bed. Then the doctor observed the sheets rippling, as if someone were pulling at the corners. What makes this so different is that he saw this for himself, and as a doctor, he was an expert in determining rational causes for strange occurrences. But in this case, there was no rational explanation. The family decided it was best to move Virginia to another home, several miles away. They believed the house in Sauchie might have been the issue, and that moving her might quell the strange occurrences. Except moving her didn't change anything. While Virginia was in the neighboring town of Dollar, the local doctors were called after it became apparent that the thing had followed her. Doctors William and Sheila Logan arrived at the new home and heard loud knocking. In an interesting approach, they decided to set up cameras to try and capture whatever was going on. Sometime between 9 and 10:30 p.m., knocking and scratching sounds were recorded along with footage of the furniture moving. An important note: I searched high and low for even a short recording of the knocking and scratching sounds, but it seems whatever was recorded has been lost. And though it was broadcast on a BBC radio program, the consensus seems to be that the audio is gone forever. A few days later, on December 2nd, 1960, the story hit the local newspapers. One paper reported that Virginia's aunt had been pushed off the bed by someone unseen, and that Virginia lay in bed moaning as if in pain, while the bed sheets rose and fell. And it was reported that on one occasion, Virginia fell into some kind of trance-like state, during which she stared blankly and called for her dog Toby and her best friend. Both had been left behind in Ireland. And then, as quickly as the scary phenomenon started, it slowed down before stopping entirely. In fact, by early December, things were seemingly back to normal, and Virginia gave the poltergeist a name: Wee Hughie. In describing the end of the activity, one article stated, quote, "A few objects moved during the next few months, and soon both Margaret and Virginia began to blame a number of suspicious occurrences on Wee Hughie, most notably the disappearance of a few bags of candy. By March 1961, the poltergeist activity ceased completely." End quote. As for Virginia, it is believed she is now happily married with an adult son, and by now, she would be around 75 years old. But what should we make of what happened in November and December of 1960? It seems most are divided into one of two camps. Those who believe the whole thing was a hoax and that Virginia Campbell was somehow the cause of the strange phenomena. That seems pretty cut and dry. But there are those who offer a different explanation, something called recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, RSPK for short. RSPK seeks to explain alleged poltergeist activity, such as physical disturbances, moving objects, flickering lights, knocking, scratching, and more. Not as the work of a noisy ghost, but due to the subconscious of a quote-unquote agent who is experiencing some kind of hidden emotional stress. According to the Rhine Research Center, the agent, or the living person, causes movement and sounds without trying to move objects or create noise. They assert that psychological tension manifests in some type of physical release. Of course, this is more theory than anything else. But it's been suggested as a possible cause of the scary activity surrounding Virginia Campbell. And remember, at the time these manifestations started, she had experienced significant stress. Moving to a new country, leaving her dog and best friend behind, her father staying in Ireland to sell the family farm, her mother relocating for her job and leaving her with relatives, a new school, and a cramped living situation. One of these can create significant stress and emotional turmoil, but compounded, they may have been the bedrock for RSPK. What do I think? Well, maybe yes to both. I believe in the paranormal, so affirming the poltergeist theory isn't a stretch. But I also work in the mental health field, and have seen firsthand how overwhelming stress can manifest somatically in a person's body. Is it too far to say that stress can manifest outside the body? I'm not sure, but I guess that's the real question, isn't it? As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. Was the Sauchie poltergeist supernatural, or was it caused by Virginia Campbell's subconscious? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.